Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark's Happy Hour. I want to thank you all for joining me. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. This has become now a Thursday night tradition, and I think I'm going to keep it up. It seems like you guys are enjoying it just as much as I am, which is awesome. So thank you again for joining me. I hope everyone has a cocktail with them if you're of age, or I guess of the right time. I know certain time zones, maybe it doesn't make sense to have a cocktail, but it is what it is. It's kind of weird to do happy hours now. I'm used to it being dark out, but it's been pretty light out here in Connecticut at this time, which is 7:30. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to do something really cool. Before I jump into it, if you like what you see today, or if this is your first time here, or visiting my channel, or visiting my website, or visiting my blog, please make sure you subscribe. So hit the little subscribe down on the bottom right. Hit the notifications if you want to be notified for the next live session that I do, or even when I post tutorial videos. For example, the subscribing to the blogs or subscribing to the YouTube channel is really helpful with that. We just rolled over 30,000 subscribers, which is awesome. I was shooting for 60,000 for this year. So anyone who's there who hasn't subscribed, please subscribe and help me get there. That'd be really cool. It's great to get the word out there of Revit and all the stuff that you guys enjoy and I enjoy talking about. So today is an interesting one. Today I struggled with whether I should do this live. So this has been on my little board over here for quite some time as a tutorial to create, a sort of case study tutorial to create. And I've been enjoying these live sessions so much that I decided let's try it out. And the reason I say I was struggling with whether I should do it live is simply because I'm going to be running Twinmotion, Enscape, Revit, and streaming using OBS, and obviously the webcam and everything like that, all on my laptop. And so for anyone who has used all of those programs, or at least one of them, you know that as much as I love in every single one of these, Enscape, Revit, all these things, they're near and dear to my heart, obviously, as software is concerned, they can crash or freeze up or not respond and whatnot. And the other thing is this particular project is also it's a real project, so I'm using models from other people as well, and because of that, the project's in Revit 2018, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. 2018 wasn't that bad of a version, but when you're using older versions and stuff, you can run into some issues too. So full disclosure, I hopefully everything works well, but this is a live demonstration, so I'm hoping that we don't have any issues. But if we do, I'm counting on you guys to lighten up the chat and and ask me questions or something if there ends up being some downtime. So with that being said, MJP just said his laptop can't handle Twinmotion, let alone all four. Actually, that's a good point. I wanted to post the actual laptop that I'm going to be using. So the links will be in the comments of the video afterwards, as well as the blog post, but I am posting it in the chat, the live chat right now. So this is the exact laptop that I'm presenting to you on. So if you're looking at laptops and stuff, it's an Origin laptop. If you saw my review of what laptop I use, this is the one. So it'd be kind of interesting for you guys to maybe see how this thing could handle all this stuff. As you can tell, I'm a little nervous about it, but we'll see. Okay, so today what we're doing is I'm going to compare Twinmotion and Enscape. So if you remember, if you've been following me for at least the last couple months, I did reviews of basically the three kind of top AEC real-time rendering programs that I guess are out there right now, which is Twinmotion, Lumion, and Enscape. I know there's other ones, but I'm kind of putting those as my top three for different reasons. And so back when I started sort of learning Twinmotion, this was 6 months ago or so, I wanted to compare and contrast. In particular, it was the actual virtual reality aspect of it. So again, trying to compare all these programs isn't necessarily apples to apples, even though it kind of is, but They all have sort of things that they're very good at, things that maybe they're mediocre at, and so on. And so one of the things that I was looking at was if let's say Twinmotion became the only program. So before Twinmotion came into play for me personally, it was Lumion for visualization, overall sort of big scenes, building forests and skylines and cities and towns and making renderings and images like that. And then Enscape was quicker, easier way to get into quick and dirty renderings that became part of the design process. And then virtual reality was the other piece of Enscape, because Lumion didn't really, and still doesn't really, dabble into the virtual reality zone as much as the others. And so when jumping into Twinmotion, what was nice about it, or what I kind of saw as a possibility, is could this be the solution? Instead of using Enscape for VR and Lumion for visualization, can I use Twinmotion for visualization and VR? So in order to sort of test out that hypothesis, so to speak, a opportunity came up, and a lot of what I do as far as virtual reality is concerned usually comes along the lines of mock-ups, virtual mock-ups. And if you saw my happy hour from a couple weeks ago, which I will again link, actually I'll link it right now as I'm talking, because why not? A few weeks ago I talked about sort of BIM in construction, and I did a little piece on some examples of virtual mock-ups. And that's a lot of what I do as far as virtual reality is concerned. So there's two reasons for mock-ups. One is end user input, maybe in-wall verification, I guess you should say, location of outlets and plugs and all that stuff. And obviously healthcare is one of those instances where you've got a lot of random crap in the walls. You've got a lot of players, a lot of users, and a lot of things to work with, equipment I should say, to work with. And so an opportunity came up as I was sort of jumping into the Twinmotion, let me try it out on projects sort of thing, and it was a mock-up that I had to do for a operating room on a hospital nearby. And so what I thought would be really cool is to, normally the process for us would be mock up the room, we take the architect's model, and this is me working as the construction manager at this point in time. And so we take the architect's model, we take the information from maybe the medical equipment consultant, the submittals from the engineers, the approved submittals from the architect, finishes, owner input, whatever. We tie all that information, the coordination model, so obviously locations of lights and diffusers and outlets usually aren't exactly where they are on the drawings, the construction documents I should say. So taking all of this, compiling it together into one mock-up virtual model, making it look pleasing. So the idea of virtual reality is immersing people into the scene. And if you have something that's flat, doesn't have good materials, doesn't have good lighting, it kind of ruins the experience. And what you want people to do is not focus on the fact that the scene looks like a cartoon. You want them to focus on the fact that this is their end product and we want feedback for it. So anyways, what I decided to do is take the normal path like I would, which is add the detail, tweak the models, add the information we need, model new stuff, bring in other more detailed models, etc., and basically build this operating room as if I was going to do an Enscape virtual mockup. At the time, the goal was what we typically do, which would be putting the VR goggles on, having the end user put the VR goggles on, and get feedback. Obviously, with COVID-19 and all the craziness going on in the world, we ended up just doing virtual reviews, moving around and flying the model using Zoom and whatnot. So either way, same idea, it's just not that fully immersive experience. But anyways, what I decided to do was take the time to build the model as if it was going to be an Enscape, and then take it, pull it into Twinmotion, and try and sort of recreate it and see where the pros and cons are. And so I essentially built two virtual mock-ups. The nice thing about it is I didn't really have to do much more extra modeling, so to speak. I did obviously have to do some things in Twinmotion to make it look a certain way, Enscape. And so I basically built these things kind of in parallel to see if I can get the same results in Twinmotion that I would get in Enscape for this virtual mockup. So all that is to tell you, these are kind of my results. And so what I want to do is I'm going to I'm going to walk you a little bit through the actual space. It's pretty simple. It's just a one OR. It repeated 6 times around the core of this building, so it made sense to choose this one because it was pretty much redundant. Get this right, and ideally you get the rest of the 6 right on that floor. And so we're just gonna see the one. I will show you sort of what it looked like before, when we just got the models from the design team, and then what it looked like afterwards. And I'll walk through a little bit of the model. We'll look at some quick still renderings of before and afters, of each program, and then we'll jump into the live versions of each program. And I just want to walk through sort of what I see as the pros and cons kind of each, and maybe we'll come up with a resolution of which one comes out the winner. We'll see. I am going to try my best to keep up with the chat, so feel free to ask questions as you go along. I do believe that this will probably stir some questions from you guys, so feel free to ask along the way. I'll do my best to answer them as I go through. There is a little bit of a delay, so just be wary of that. And yeah, so I see a few folks chatting on here. When is the video and that guitar in the background? I guess I could do a review of the guitars, but I don't know if that would make sense on this channel. Maybe I'll make my own channel for that, but one day maybe. I do love those guitars back there. And then there was a quick question already before I jump into it, and how can you save the theme and styles in Enscape, like saving and importing styles? And so I'll get into that when we jump into Enscape. I think what you're saying is, how do you save the visual settings or the general settings from Enscape so you can use them in other projects? The good thing about it, I think, is that as long as you're in the same version of Revit, it defaults to, regardless of what project you're in, it defaults to the last settings that you used. So that's nice, but you can also save them too. All right. Let me have a drink, and then we will begin. Let's do this. So I think my head is in an okay location. I always try to pre-set up where my floating head is on here for you guys, but it's really hard to do when you're flipping through multiple programs. So I'm going to try my best, and if you see my head zooming around this space, it's probably because there's something important that maybe I'm covering. But for now, I'm going to jump right into this thing, and we'll talk about it. So like I said, this is an operating room. It's a pretty typical operating room. It's a little on the small side, but it's not like a robotic operating room or any of those specialty rooms. It's pretty much a standard operating room for this particular hospital. And this is the Revit model, as you can see. And I'll zoom in and start looking at some of the content in here. You can see what's going on here. Actually, you know what? Let's have some fun with it. Let me slice this over here. So it's pretty simple. Luckily, it's only about 4 walls. But you can see as I look at these walls, one of the key components here was looking at all of the information on these walls. And so, oof, that line work is a little tough, guys. Let me change the scale a little bit here. Here we go. So you can see there's things like thermostats, light switches, controls, nurse calls, phones, outlets, data outlets, even some blanks. These are for a control box for one of the boom arms, which you're seeing a little bit there. And so one of the major pieces of this mock-up was actually verifying the location of a lot of these pieces, and then getting those into the in-wall roughs and making sure everything was coordinated. So you obviously have to verify the equipment. You have to verify the location of the equipment, things like TVs and monitors on walls and whatnot. Those are important to locate the switches and outlets and receptacles behind them, right? So that's kind of a piece of it. You could see as you go along, fire pole stations, some different things like that. If I move along the room here, pull this out a little bit. I'm going to pull this down too so that the booms aren't as much in the way. But I just want to give you a little run around of the room because I think it's important that you kind of see where you're going. And also sort of see what you're seeing here is kind of the level of models that we would do typically in our virtual mock-ups. Ideally, we're modeling, remember this is for a mock-up, so we're not duplicating this 17 times for the sake of construction documents, so we can use more complex and really, I would say, worse models, right? Not efficient for documents, but efficient but visually pleasing. And so wherever we can, we will use or create more detailed models. And so you could see some of the things like this arm thing, which which was a modification off of one probably found on Revit City or BIM Object or something like that. And then this Pixis machine, which was kind of a modification of one that we found. And so a lot of what we do with the healthcare, and I know that's one of the first questions we're going to get. And look at that. As I'm saying it, Lenny asked the question, where did you find these families? And so that's the very first question we always get. And so there's a lot of answers to that, right? We build them. So we do build a lot of families for this kind of stuff because, again, you don't necessarily have it. Believe it or not, there's quite a bit of healthcare families out there. It may not be exactly what you need, but you can modify them, or they're close enough to size and dimensions and whatnot to the manufacturing that was submitted that you can use them. And then, typical locations like a BIM, we'll try our best to go to the manufacturer first, then a place like BIM Objects or any of those, any of those depositories. Then last but not least, if we really need to, we'll search Revit City. But with Revit City, what I tell my team, and I hope you guys all tell your teams too, or yourself, is that you should never just bring a Revit City model directly into your model. You should open that thing up in the family editor and take a look at it before bringing it into your model. Because anyone who's ever been on Revit City, which I'm sure everyone in here has, that there's quite a bit of trash in there. So you got to be really careful with that. So some of them, it's really a combination of everything. Things like this anesthesia cart and this cart over here. These are just, again, these are sort of different locations pulled together. A lot of them have been modified over the years by us, and some are better than others. But again, this is Revit, and so you're limited to some extent of what you can bring in and import, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit. So just going around, like I showed you over here, there's a Pixis machine over here, which is kind of like a portable pharmacy, so to speak. And then there's just a bunch of equipment surrounding the walls. Everything's on wheels in here, so the reality is only certain things. It really, really made a huge difference to the location. But things like hand sanitizer on the walls, switches here, thermostats, all that stuff was obviously really important. Okay, so that's a walkthrough of it. The other piece too is obviously it's an OR. So most of the time in ORs, you're going to have some sort of a scrub sink situation, and then a visual look into whether it's in the hallway like this one or out there, or a big room before it. So that was important. There was a couple of pieces of equipment, which I'll talk about when we jump inside, that got moved around quite a bit because of this mock-up and because of these windows here and the view placement of all this good stuff. All right, so I'm going to stop clicking around like crazy because I know with those stupid... I should have went on to the options and got rid of the damn... the lines disappearing on view navigation. That drives me bonkers. I'm sure it's driving you guys bonkers. So I see a few conversations going on. Yes, Revit City is like Craigslist. It's a good point, right? If you're going to go buy something off Craigslist, your mind immediately thinks of safety and the whole process of getting that that item off Craigslist is a different approach than if you're on Amazon, for example, right? So that's a good analogy. I like that. I like that. Yeah, and so again, I'm not going to say that I've never taken families from Revit City. I have, but my rule of thumb with those is always open them in the family editor first before bringing them into your models, and take a look at them and see if they're useful, if they're built well, if they're just like SAT imports into your file and scaled and all that crap. You just make sure it's something that you want in your file. And for the sake of what you're seeing here, a lot of what we're doing is modified too. And so the other thing we'll look at too is it's an OR, it's an operating room, so ceilings are obviously important. So here's just a quick 3D working view of the ceiling. Some of the things. So Stryker, for those of you familiar with operating rooms in healthcare, Stryker, their families are so they have a family depository. You can reach out to them and they give you access to it. To be honest with you, most of them are kind of junky. What you see here is actually sort of modified versions of their families that we created. But these are essentially, if not identical, very close to the ones that will be in the OR. And so these are just face-based families that are sitting on the ceiling. Same thing here. These are face-based vents that are sitting here. Troffer lights here, 2x2s and 2x4s. Some can lights around the edges. Of course, sprinkler heads, speakers, those kind of things. Are become important in these virtual mock-ups because the whole point is to verify. Here's a camera here. The whole point is to verify this stuff before we build it, right? That's the key here. So there's a little look of the ceiling and of the floor plan of the OR. So what I want to do now is I want to pull up the two images, and I want you guys to guess in the chat which one you think is Twinmotion, which one you think is Enscape. And yeah, I'll see. Maybe I'll pick somebody who got the somebody who got it right. I'll pick, and I'll send him a T-shirt or give him some kind of prize. So, anyways, what we'll do is we'll do number 1 and number 2, and you just type which one you think is Enscape and which one you think is Twinmotion. So, what I'm going to do is I'll pull up the image, and if you think it's Enscape, type 1. If you think it's Twinmotion, type 2 in the chat. All right. So let's do this. Here we go. So this is one of the first images, and if you think it's Enscape, type 1. If you think it's Twinmotion, type 2, and then I'll tell everyone at the end, or after showing both of them. So this is the rendering, and also just to let you know, these are raw renderings. So there's no photoshopping, there's no post processing. I wanted these to be exactly what came out. So so again, here is image number 1. So let me know if this is number 1 or number 2, if this is Twinmotion or Enscape. Got a couple guesses. Perfect. I know there's a delay, so it's gonna be kind of difficult. So thank you guys for who is guessing. Awesome. And now this is image number 2. So 3. Somebody's guessing 3. What is happening over here? It's kind of scattered. All right, so for this first image, I won't say what it is yet because I want to go to the next image. But you guys can stop guessing now. Wow, look at everyone's guessing. So cool. Look how many guesses there were. There might have been a way to do polls on here. I apologize. Maybe there's not. That would have been kind of cool if there's a way to do polls on YouTube Live. I guess I'm a little new at it. Oh well. Okay, so this is the first image, so we're going to stop guessing on this one now. And now here's the second image. So again, if you think it's Enscape, I want you to type number 1. If you think it's Twinmotion, I want you to type number 2. Or type Enscape or Twinmotion, whatever. You get the idea. So there might be a little delay because I'm looking at the stream now to see if we're looking at the right stuff while you guys are guessing, which is kind of cool. Perfect. All right. Awesome. So we've got a bunch of people guessing, which is great. So thanks for guessing. Awesome. I'll just run through, and somebody who got it right on the replay, I'll reach out to you guys. that was I guess I didn't plan out how that was gonna go too well, but so looks like for the most part a majority of you got it right, but there were some here and there. So yeah, so let's do it now. So first image is Twinmotion, what you're looking at right now. Second image is Enscape. So Twinmotion, Enscape. Twinmotion, Enscape. So for those of you who have spent time in a lot of those programs, you may have some giveaways. So for example, if you've spent time in the new Twinmotion, you know that there is a transparent material, and over in the corner here, there's a pipe running through that's transparent. That was for that through wall coordination I was talking about. The line work tool, actually, I have line work on slightly for Enscape, which is here. The exposure, anyone who's worked in Enscape knows that interior lighting usually, and these are actually default settings. I think what I wanted to do was make sure I didn't tweak anything. So these are default. Enscape is usually a little overexposed, but at the same time it's nice because the artificial lighting always looks really, really nice. But and then here's Twinmotion, which again, some things might give it away. If you look quickly at the people in the back here, I guess that doesn't really give away too much. But yeah, there's the reflection itself, there's sort of this cute spherical reflection here. A couple things, we'll talk about that in a second. But I think a lot of you got it right, which is pretty cool. I think it's kind of cool to compare the two. Again, there's Enscape, there's Twinmotion, Enscape. And at the end of the day, before I jump into the actual programs, when you just look at these images, raw rendered images, I think any one of us would take these as some pretty good interior mock-up images, right? I mean, these for progress and working, these look pretty good. Actually, the other thing, which I guess you couldn't see unless you zoomed in, was the anesthesia cart or the anesthesia machine is different. And so we'll talk about that in a second, but the one in Twinmotion is different than the one in Revit. And there's a reason for that, but looks like everyone is also liking, there's a little debate on which one people like better. I think an image like this is very, very much in the eye of the beholder, because I do think that they're pretty close on par with what it is, but I think what you want to see now is sort of what it took to make each of these in each of the programs, right? So let's jump into that now. So I've mentioned these before, but I think in this situation, it's a pretty good opportunity to walk through and show and demonstrate sort of live the benefits and the pros and cons, I should say. So one of the nice things about the Enscape version of it, right? There's a few nice things, but the lightings and the lighting, the reflections and materials, and the overall general sort of look of it is nice. And what's great about it, you can see I could probably do a little better on some of the reflections on the floor and stuff. You know, importing sort of PBR materials and whatnot. But again, I was kind of torn between whether I was going to do it full on in either program. But a lot of this is sort of done for you, right? I shouldn't say done for you. We have families that have artificial lighting in them that make the lights that you see. You know, the materials are a lot of the same materials we use. And so you're not doing a lot of extra work there. So that's really nice. So if I jump into Enscape now, this is where things are going to get hairy. Here we go. And what I'm going to try and do, I know there may be a little bit of a lag and a little bit of buffering, so I'm going to try not to move around fast, but I think everyone out there who uses Revit or 3D programs knows that as a person who sits in them every day, it's really easy to get carried away with your orbiting speed and your moving speed, so I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to do my best. So here we are. What I did also is I made both of the cameras the same. They're both at 90 millimeter focal length and stuff like that, trying to make it very similar. So you can see here the Enscape, and these are default Enscape lighting settings and visual settings. I did not want to modify it too much for the sake of it. But if you move around, you can see the reflections look pretty good. I should probably turn some of them up, like on the floor and whatnot. You know, there could be more reflections, but it is doing a pretty good job at reflecting the objects and not sort of an HDR or something. You could see that material there is pretty nice, moving around. You know, there's a lot of nice materiality coming on here. But the best part about this is what it looks like basically when I launched it. And so, because we've built these families and we've had these families and we've used these families over and over again, there wasn't a lot of adjusting of the lighting. The artificial lighting is a little blown out in my opinion, but you know, it still works really well for just launching Enscape and seeing this right here, right? The materials, to apply materials, I'm simply applying them in Revit like you would any material in Revit. And so that's really nice. I create materials, I create textures, and then they show up. They're there, right? So that's great. You know, the exposures kind of drive me nuts right now. I should probably turn that down a little bit. But the artificial lighting is going nuts. You can see some of the hot spots there, which I think someone mentioned in the comments, and a few other things. If I go out in the hallway, there's nothing there. Come back in. I wanted to see if the exposure adjusted a little. So you can see, I mean, it looks good. I mean, I'm not. This is sort of the bar that we were trying to reach, and the whole point of this, remember, is a real-time mock-up. It's not producing a still image that we're going to poly pretty up with photoshopping and send off to the client. It's to move around these scenes and talk about things like, you know, all of the outlets and plugs and information, right? ideally in a virtual reality setting, but here it was just kind of running through it. So another really cool thing that Twinmotion doesn't technically have, but sort of does have, is an Ortho View. And so it's kind of goofy for VR, but in 2.7, I believe, or 2.6, Enscape introduced an Ortho View. The one thing I'm going to try to do, which I'm a little worried about, but we might as well try, is I need to flip to a view with a section box like this one. So if I flip to working view OR, remember, Twinmotion is also running in the background, so cross our fingers. Come on. As that's happening, I will read some of your comments here. Why don't you just adjust the reflections in Enscape? Like I said, I was kind of doing both, and you can tell by the light hotspots. Everyone's talking about the space mouse. I never got into space mice. I'm sorry, guys. I know everyone has their way, or has their opinions on mice, but I've been a gamer my whole life on PCs, and so moving around in this WASD and mouse thing is like second nature to me. Speaking of mice, if you remember last week, I was talking about the MX518. Well, it's here, and there it is, and I'm loving every second of it. It's beautiful, beautiful mouse. Maybe I'll link that again down there today. But okay, so here's the the sort of perspective view of that cut view that we're looking at. But you do have now an orthographic view, which is kind of like how realistic should be in Revit. I guess they're trying it now with the new ray tracing in 2021. But man, does this look super, super cool. So it's an orthographic view with all your rendering, all your rendered materials and whatnot. It looks even better if I turn on a little bit more outlines. And yeah, you guys can't see the adjustment because Enscape for some reason still hasn't fixed that whole window popping behind window thing. But so there's the orthographic view, which super cool. So what's really nice with these mockups was I can create views like this and export them, and then we use these to node up and stuff like that. And so super, super cool. Definitely a benefit. I'll show you how you can kind of try and do it in Twinmotion, but the reality is it doesn't really exist in Twinmotion. It's much better in Enscape. So we lighting materials and whatnot. Those things are huge benefits of Enscape as far as being able to quickly jump into them. And the other thing, which I can't really show you here, but you can take my word for it, is the VR experience in Enscape. So what's really nice about Enscape is what you see in your goggles is typically very similar to what you see on screen. Or a lot of other programs, what you see in the goggles, they may have reduced lighting, reduced reflections, and so on and so forth. It's very similar to what you see in the scene, and you also have the freedom to move around the space freely using a D-pad and walking and some really cool things like that. So I still, and I'll talk about it when we jump into Twinmotion, but there are still some features, in my opinion. Oh, look at that, landing right in the room. That Twinmotion is lacking a little bit as far as the VR experience is concerned. So the lighting, reflections, materials, the ease and simple use of it from Revit in connection with Enscape is a no-brainer. And then of course there's the Ortho, which I just showed you, and then the VR experience. And so what are kind of the cons, so to speak? What are the negatives, and why, if this works so well for us, why bother trying with Twinmotion for this experience? And so there's kind of two really main reasons that I was interested in it. One is the ability to bring in content from anywhere. So everyone out there, I'm assuming most of you are Revit users. If not, you maybe started using it, or you at least know a little bit about it. So if you're watching this video, you're probably somewhat of a Revit user. And you know that bringing in content and models from other programs isn't usually the most useful thing. Bringing in CAD files and trying to change materials, SketchUp files, 3D Max, you go down the list, Blender, whatever, you pick a program. You can actually import a lot of things now, but you still, making them look photorealistic in an immersive environment like this is pretty difficult, if not impossible, depending on where it's coming from. So a nice thing about using a Twinmotion is that you can import, FBX, DAE. You can go through. There's like 6 or 7 major file types that they like, and it comes in perfectly. So what I mean by perfectly is I can go on TurboSquid, which as Revit users, TurboSquid is usually not a very useful website for us. Sometimes it is, but very, very rarely do you find some good Revit models, usable Revit models in TurboSquid. I have found some, I will say that. And if you find them and they're great, they're worth every penny, right? But I can go on TurboSquid, for example, and download a perfect example is going to be this anesthesiologist cart, and I'll show you what it looks like. For $20 or whatever it was, I downloaded it, brought it right into Twinmotion. All the materials are mapped. This thing looked beautiful, huge, highly detailed polys, and you name it. And I can dump it right into the scene. So that is really cool. Because again, interior scenes like this is all about the content, right? It's all about building the scene and making it real. So that was great. The other thing, which is kind of lacking on the Enscape side, which is understandably lacking because it sits on top of Revit, is animated objects. And so what you'll see when I jump into Twinmotion is that we can make the people walking by in the hallway and the guy standing and talking on his phone and so on. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're making an immersive environment, for example, the people moving it helps. It really adds to sound and help and good stuff like that. So yeah, so those are kind of the cons, I would say. And so we're gonna jump into Twinmotion, and I'll show you sort of what that looks like and how I created what you see there. I saw a few questions coming in, so I wanted to run through. How can we improve modeling in Revit? You can check out the RevitKid.com and check out all my tutorials and so on. The lighting fixture, I'll talk about lighting and reflection in Twinmotion when I jump over to that in a second. Rhino, they just mentioned Rhino. If you guys saw my happy hour last week with Marcelo, who also was here. Marcelo, what's up, man? Thanks for joining. We talked a little bit about Rhino, or a lot about Rhino last week. And so, yes, you could bring in Rhino objects directly into Twinmotion without passing them through Revit. And they come in with all their materials and polys and all the good stuff. So, that's a pro of Twinmotion, a con of Enscape, right? Enscape is doing a great job building their own asset library, and I talked about that when I reviewed Enscape. I talked about it in one of the happy hours, and I'll probably talk about it again in the future. But there's still, building a highly detailed asset library and sitting on top of Revit. There's also some cons there, so we'll talk about that at a future date. But Marcelo, thanks for joining me, dude. If you want to see Marcelo and our conversation from last week, it was cool. It was talking about running Rhino inside of Revit and Grasshopper inside of Revit and connecting them and Dynamo and all this really cool stuff. Go check that out. I'll link it below as well. He asked if the FBX can be animated. So actually right now, Lumion can bring in animated FBXs. Twinmotion cannot. But I do know that it is on the list for one of the next updates of 2020, and I think it's a pretty high priority. So I think in the future you will see it fairly soon. And so I think the limitation I heard is that Twinmotion is truly a real-time program, whereas even things like Lumion, which have baking of the scene, there's something about how it reads animated FBXs coming in and how that loops and stuff, but whatever. Either way, right now it cannot, but I believe it's supposed to be able to. You can add sound. You can add a few other things. You can add videos too in Twinmotion. We'll get in that right now. So let me jump into Twinmotion, because it sounds like a lot of people have questions about that. If you have any questions on Enscape, feel free to jump in the chat. But now, so I talked about Enscape. I talked about some of the great things about it, which is the lighting, the materials, the reflections, all that good stuff, and how quickly they can happen because of this integration with Revit. The Ortho View is really, really cool. It's awesome. If you haven't tried it out, you need to try it out. It's super, super awesome. The VR experience is great. And then, of course, some of the cons I talked about is limited to Revit content, which can be a limitation. As you can see from looking at my scene, we've tried our best to overcome that limitation with crazy modeling efforts, as well as crazy model searching efforts, I should say too. And so we've overcome a lot of that, but it's still fairly limited. The detail and stuff. Some of it just doesn't make sense to get to the level of detail that maybe would be required in Revit, I should say. And then of course, still versus animated content, which I don't know if Enscape ever plans on animating content, but it would be really cool to see Dwayne or Laurent or Leroy or one of those guys from Revit just sort of walk around your scene, sitting on top of Revit. All right, so that was Enscape. So now let me jump over to Twinmotion and talk a little bit about how I got to what you're seeing here. Okay. First things first, you'll notice that people are walking in the hallway. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into a presenter mode to hide a lot of these nasty UIs. There we go. Okay. So this is the Twinmotion scene, and I tried with the Twinmotion scene. I tried to get the settings fairly close to the color and lighting of Enscape, just to give us a sort of apples to apples. But if I move around here, it's giving me a hard time because the presenter mode wants to be on my other monitor, which is a little annoying. But let me try and keep it there. So already you can see that it's pretty cool with the people in the hallway, sort of walking around. And then I had a guy behind me who was talking on his phone, and he was animated, and he looked pretty cool. Let me slow myself down here because I'm sure you guys are probably driving yourself nuts. But that alone is kind of neat. The reflections look pretty good. You can see I made the reflection of this computer monitor way more than I did in the Enscape version, which I probably should have changed. The lighting themselves look really good. It looks pretty neat. If I go over here, before we jump into the lighting, I want to talk about the content. Here's that awesome. Look at this thing. My goodness, this thing was like $30 or something like that on TurboSquid, and it was an FBX DAE and like a 3D Max file or something like that. It came in and I just plopped it in my scene, and this is what it looked like. Materials, everything, right? Again, the closest we got, and this is, I'm not going to say this is a bad family, because honestly, this thing is coming handy for us quite a bit. But look at this, right, and then this, right? Super cool. So that's the benefit of bringing in content, being able to bring in content that making this in Revit. I'm not going to say you can't do it, because I know you can do it, right? It's completely possible. But look at the texture mapping and sort of the modeling itself isn't maybe crazy, but the texture mapping and the detail that's out there, that stuff is extremely helpful. And when you have when you have an anesthesiologist who's actually looking through this, it really does help to have. Sorry, I'm trying really hard not to orbit fast for you guys, so I apologize ahead of time. It really helps to have highly detailed content, because then they immediately know what it is, and they can talk to it, which is pretty sweet. Actually, let's go in the hallway so you guys can see these people walking. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of ghosting. It's probably because I have everything maxed out, and I'm running. Here we go. Hey, I'm running Enscape, Revit, all this good stuff. So I think it's trying to limit itself a little bit there. Pretty cool. All right, so you can see you can have people walking in the hallway. You can have people in the room. They do have a limited amount of actual healthcare content right now within the library of Twinmotion. So like people, for example, not too many doctors and scrubs and whatnot, which Enscape does currently have, and I believe we'll have more in the future. But that's okay. So now let's talk about the actual scene and how I developed it. I was reading questions really quickly. So somebody asked, actually kind of cool, can you add a custom video clip in Twinmotion? You can, which is really cool. And so in 2020, you can actually just import an MP4 as a texture, which maybe towards the end, I'll close Enscape and just do a quick demo of it. Because I don't want to do that at the same time on this live stream. I'm way too afraid of things crashing on me right now. but it actually loops the video. It's super, super, super cool. In 2019, what you had to do is there's a little trick to copy and paste a directory path. Maybe I'll actually do a completely separate tutorial on the blog for that, because that's a really cool piece of information. Okay, so now let's talk about how the heck did I get it to look like this? Because those of you who have used Twinmotion, you know that interior scenes don't necessarily look this sort of realistic with these lighting and reflection. And this is where the first con comes into play. So, the pros here are obviously other content, bringing in all that other content, like I mentioned, Turbo Squid, Rhino models, whatever, right? And then animating elements is really cool, so being able to put animations in it is super neat. And then VR does work, and it looks, I would say honestly, when you get a scene to look like this, it does look, what you see in VR does look very similar to what you see on screen, which is one of the keys there. I do have to warn you that on this particular machine, I did notice quite a bit of performance issues at the highest ultra settings in VR, where I don't necessarily notice those using Enscape. So I think we were running it at, when we tested it, we were running it at one less than ultra or something like that. But it still looked fairly good. So not a big issue. The only downfall, and I mentioned this in the past with Twinmotion, is that you have to teleport to move around. You can't just walk using a D-pad, which sucks. It doesn't sound like it sucks, but when you're in it enough, it's sort of annoying. And then having nurses and stuff try and like shoot to the ground and teleport over to the operating chair, if they don't have enough room to physically walk in our VR space, or our real space, I should say, it kind of sucks. So those are kind of my pros there for Twinmotion, is that it does use VR, so you can have a scene like this, and you can use VR and get animated objects and a lot of cool stuff. You can bring in other objects, and VR, and sorry, what else did I say? And bring in other cons. Yeah. So now the cons. So I talked about the VR con, sort of the fact that the walking sucks on it, and the performance is a little laggy. I think it's just a heavier piece. The other piece is, so you notice the lighting looks pretty good. I got the lighting to look almost just like Enscape. The reflections look pretty good. Well, if I hit the G key, which G hides extras, so to speak, so it hides elements and objects that you place in Twinmotion, you'll notice there's a bunch of things floating around my scene. Uh-oh, don't do that, Jeff. Hold on. So what that is are reflection probes. So notice if I turn these on and off, take a look at these computers here. Ready? If I turn this reflection probes container off, notice the difference in all of the materials. Hopefully you guys can see that through the live. And then look at the lights. Ready? So if I turn off reflections and lights, this is probably what you're used to seeing. So this is what essentially the scene looked like right when I brought it in. Obviously I had to add materials. So I had to physically add light objects and reflection probes. The reflection probes, I have to be honest with you, are not that upsetting to me. And so let me explain what a reflection probe is real quick. So right here, see this little thing? This is like an orb. And what it's doing is it's telling the surface, the reflective surfaces that it touches, it's telling it what to reflect. And so what you can do with this is kind of cool, is you can tell surfaces to reflect the world, but then when you want to refine areas, you can actually place them in different areas and get a better reflection for just those areas. So if you'll notice, what I did here is I have one big reflection probe in the middle. And so that thing is the size of the room. If I zoom out, you can see there it is there. If you press F, by the way, it zooms to whatever object you're selecting. So that's that one works, and it helps with the whole room. So if you see, if I turn this on and off, it helps with the whole room. But if you want things like these computers to look nice, you need to start adding more detailed reflections, because you can see here, if I just use the room one, it does some weird crap. it's like reflecting something over there. So you kind of need to be careful with where you place those and how you want them to look. And obviously the more reflection probes you place, the more it affects your performance. But what's kind of nice about it is you have the control over where your detailed reflections are. Whereas in an environment like Enscape, and if those of you who have worked in Enscape, and if you've ever gone in if this room was all stainless steel, for example, and had a bunch of mirrors, and then you went in an Enscape, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. It starts to, there's there's a lot going on, and it can affect performance and whatnot, and it has a way, and I'm sure it's a computer resource thing. It has a way of handling all of that. So what's kind of nice is that you do have the ability to manufacture where your highly detailed reflections are. So in a scene like this where it's one room or two rooms, it's not too bad. I haven't done it on a full floor mock-up in Twinmotion and what that might look like. If you wanted though, you control everything by containers, so you could in theory turn off reflection probes in all the other rooms that you're not in and turn it back on, whatever. But this goes with the idea that it's fully real time, right? What you see is what you get. When I press render, it looks very much what you're looking at on screen. There's no baking, and what's nice about that is it's also super fast, right? So those the images popping out of this thing take 30 seconds or less, right? So those are reflection planes, and then lights, as you can see here, by using a lighted material, exposure's a little much there. By using a lighted a lighted object, it does produce light for the scene, right? Excuse me, sorry. Throat's getting a little dry from the wine, I think. And so this is doable, but adding the actual light objects, it helps with adding those, for example, the scallops on the walls, and the shadows are key too. So the scallops are nice, but what I want you to really pay attention to is shadows. So if I turn off lights, see the difference? Hopefully you can see the difference. The shadows themselves, it does an okay job, but by adding artificial lighting into the scene, which are those light objects, it also helps a lot with the overall shadow. So on a scene like this, adding these things isn't really that huge, right? It takes very little time. Obviously, on a very large scene and on a different type of scenes, it can be time consuming. So that's something to think about, right? There we go. They do have they have area lights, and so the lights, you can place square shaped lights and stuff like that. So it makes it easier to place them. But you're managing objects and you're sort of duplicating work that you wouldn't be duplicating in when you're using Enscape, for example. Enscape will use the light source that's already there. So that to me is probably the biggest downfall. You're also reapplying materials, but because in general, you're gonna want to create Twinmotion materials and apply them to objects. Of course, when it comes in, like I said, most of these objects, like from TurboSquid, FBXs, will come in perfectly just because that's how they're made. But with Revit, there's always issues with the scaling of the texture maps and the reflections and all that good stuff. So you're pretty much replacing all of your Revit materials. The good thing is it's pretty easy to replace them, and they will always look better at the end. And if your sole purpose is to get it into Twinmotion, then I would suggest that you're probably not going to do all the material mapping in Revit. You're just going to give yourself material names with colors, and then you can do the material mapping in Twinmotion. Personally, that's what I would do. So let's see here. That's kind of the rundown of what I did. So the big downfall here was having to place reflection probes and lighting. But there's also obviously some huge bonuses, right? So let me jump out of this. Look at my camera. Hey, oh, there I am. I'm going to read some Q&A. So that's kind of the overview. I hope that was helpful. Now I'm going to read some Q&A, and we can talk a little bit more about it, which is pretty sweet. So it looks like there's a few things, a few questions here. Hopefully the Enscape team allows people to add their custom content. I won't speak for the Enscape team, so I'll let them speak for that in the future. But I'm hoping that they do that too. They do have a live sort of feature board that they usually tell you what they're adding to the next thing, so make sure you set that up. Marcelo, thanks again for joining and asking questions. Asked if you can open Twinmotion files in Unreal. Currently, you cannot. It's a Twinmotion file. It's always going to be a Twinmotion file. It's built on top of Unreal, but it is Twinmotion. And it's on the list if you go on Twinmotion sort of future and possible what to add features and whatnot. It is part of it. I don't know how much of that will come into play. from what I can tell, and my, this is just my personal opinion on maybe what's happening or what I see happening is maybe Epic sees Twinmotion as possibly the gateway drug into Unreal. I don't know. I don't know though, because I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't see architects, engineers, and contractors making that jump because the great thing about Twinmotion is how simple it is to use. Unreal's great, don't get me wrong. I mean, that's basically the same thing, right? But it's the UI and the simplicity that's nice. Unreal is like learning Revit again, right? There's a lot in that program. I mean, and you could, if you wanted to, you could bring FBXs right into Unreal right now and bypass Twinmotion, but now you're losing the library and the simplicity of the UI. That's all. Donald said, I find Twinmotion particularly unstable. It crashes, blah, blah, blah. Yes. So 2020, which only came out a month ago or whatever, and they already had a hotfix. So if you haven't installed it, make sure you install the hotfix because that was extremely helpful. There are some areas where I can agree that it's crashed. It crashed on me too. It seems to me like they are popping out hotfixes and trying to fix that pretty quickly. Personally, I haven't found the issues until I've gotten to the larger scenes, and by large scenes, I'm talking, city blocks. I'm talking 12, 16 gigabyte file size scenes. That's the only time where we start having some major issues. I've been in contact with them. They've been really receptive to talking about and resolving issues, and so I can only hope and guess that there'll be hot fixes coming out fairly quickly that fix a lot of the issues we may have. 2019 is fairly stable in my opinion, and so I've used, before jumping in 2020, I've used it quite a bit, and it's fairly stable. So definitely be wary of that. Definitely make sure you turn on autosave if you haven't turned it on for Twinmotion, and just be wary of that. It also uses it is a resource hog. It does not, it's not shy about taking all of your resources, which in one sense to me is great because we create these massive, these awesome laptops, and so many programs have throttles all over the place. And so what's great about it is once you let the thing catch up, it runs snappy as hell. It's awesome. Like orbiting around Twinmotion is probably one of my favorite things to do ever, as far as models are concerned. But when you have larger models, you have to wait for the computer resources. It'll spike and then they'll come back, and then you can start using it. And so you have to go back to the older idea of like when you were using Revit on an 8 gigabyte machine, and you had to go eat, make your coffee when you were panning and waiting for a view to reload or something like that on a big model. So just be wary of that. And make sure to report all of your crashes and report bugs to Twinmotion and to Epic. Because like I said, they've been very receptive to me, and I think they'll be receptive to anyone. And as far as if enough of those issues come up, and even when I reach out, a lot of times they'll say, yeah, 5 or 6 other people already reached out about that. So, let's see. Years old. I am not able to import lighting fixtures from Revit to Twinmotion. So, someone asked, I can't read your name from here, sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I am not able to import lighting fixtures from Revit to Twinmotion, please help. Well, the lighting fixtures should come in. The one key thing, though, is when you go to the exporter, let's go to screen and camera. When you're in Revit and you're in the Twinmotion exporter, there's a little button here that says exclude MEP families, and by default that is checked. So if you have light fixtures, those are considered E as far as the MEP family is concerned. You need to make sure that checkbox is not checked. So those should come out then once you do that. If you're talking about the actual lighting elements, for the most part, the artificial light elements don't come through. That's why I had to place the lights themselves. So autosave has been the only pacifier for now. Yes, definitely autosave. Awesome. So let me know if you guys have any other questions. We're actually almost perfectly on time. That's bizarre. It's been an hour. So cool. So yeah, I mean, I think in conclusion, they can both do the job, which is great. And so I don't necessarily think that there is a winner per se in this particular case. I did end up using Twinmotion moving forward for the project, mainly because we ended up going into the virtual walkthrough as sort of a webinar type of, or a Zoom meeting type of thing, and not the goggles. And it was nice to be able to create a presenter mode, have this sort of memorialized version of this export, which again I could have done in Enscape, but and then also the other thing that I should have mentioned is similar. So in Enscape, if you wanted to hide equipment, for example, let me show my screen real quick. So in Enscape, if you wanted to hide equipment, you would need to set up views in Revit and flip between the views. You can use phasing for that in Twinmotion. So I was able to quickly turn off my equipment in my scene, and again, I would be in something like the presenter mode. And so as we were walking through, oops, I just went a little clip crazy, guys. So sorry. Let's try that again. Here we go. So as I'm walking through it, I can do things like turn off the equipment. And then we were looking at the actual in-wall stuff. So that was kind of cool to be able to turn it off and on. But I think generally speaking, I probably couldn't necessarily pick a winner. I think they both have their benefits. Although I will tell you that being able to grab, and I've done it on a couple of projects now, being able to grab a highly detailed healthcare model, or maybe a school, or maybe, I don't know, kitchen, whatever, from like a turbo squid and throw it right in there and have it look that great was freaking awesome. So cool, so cool. Is there any way to control shadows in outdoor scenes in Twinmotion? Yeah, there's different, depends on what you're talking about, but you can control it based on the sun lighting, the sunlight direction, the time of day, clouds, global illumination, exposure. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to control shadows. So, somebody asked if I have an enterprise account with Epic. No, I do not. I have an account with Epic because I was using 2019 before, but sweet. Some people are giving their opinions on Twinmotion versus Enscape. I appreciate that. I do think that both programs are going to be ones to watch in the next couple of years. They're both doing some really awesome things, and I believe they're heading in the right direction. So, which is pretty awesome. Have you come across a DAE converter script or plugin to Revit? No. I mean, I guess if you wanted to try to, you can, but like I mentioned before, bringing in DAEs, even SketchUp, saving it back to SketchUp 8 and all that good stuff. That's the hard piece, right? That's the pain in the butt part with Enscape, is that you are beholden to Revit and Revit content. So, the shadows appear very dark. Yeah, well, you're gonna have to adjust ambient. There's ambiance settings and whatnot in all your scenes, and so I guess I could try and just sort of look at where that is for you guys. So there's, if I get out of media mode, there's sort of a global setting here. If you go to settings, there's lighting, and you could adjust the exposure. You could adjust the shadows. If you adjust global illumination, that has a lot to do with shadows too. There's ambient lighting, so you can see that'll get rid of your darker shadows and your lighter shadows. There's contrast and whatnot. I'm interior here, so this is gonna have more to do. This is my autosave. This is gonna have more to do with the artificial lighting, but just play with all those things and you'll get to something that works for you. Been able to create imperfections. Oh yeah, Donald just made a good point. I've never really mentioned that, and I guess for these scenes I wouldn't necessarily want to do that because this is a brand new building and we're trying to show what it is. But decals and whatnot in Twinmotion are really, really, really cool. So you can see I'm just searching through a few decals, but like if I wanted to show for some reason moss on the ceiling, here we go. Let me wrote this 90 feet. So decals, and you can do custom decals now in 90. There we go. So like doing stuff like that I obviously would never necessarily want to do that in this scene, but you know, things like adding imperfections and like cracks and stuff to the wall. You know, I mean, that stuff, and it looks super cool. You could change the settings for it and whatnot. So I guess that's something that I never really saw as a advantage, because a lot of what I'm doing is new stuff. But I guess you could see where there could be some advantages to that, right? If you wanted a material to look a certain way, but okay. So I think that's it. I think I'm going to wrap it up today. If you guys have any more comments or questions, hit them in the comments or the chat, or feel free to reach out to me. You can find me at therevitKid.com, on Twitter at therevitKid, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Right? You guys know how to get to me. Thank you for. Actually, one more question I should answer. Somebody asked, Scour, actually, what's up, man? Nice to join you. Thanks for joining me again. For beginners, do you suggest TM or Lumion? And that's or Twinmotion or Lumion. And I think they're both fairly simple to use. I do think that in general, Twinmotion's UI and experience is more intuitive than Lumion. I do think that Lumion, as much as I wasn't a huge fan of their UI changes, I do think it did make it easier to learn. But there are, they both have their own sort of nuances that anyone learning the program is going to have to know, right? So I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'd have to think about that one. I personally, and for knowing people who use both, I feel like Twinmotion is easier UI to follow. I shouldn't say easier. It's more intuitive, and it will require less Googling and searching to figure out how to get to things. How about that? All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for joining me on another Thursday night happy hour. I will be here again next week. I don't know what the topic's going to be yet. I shouldn't say I do. I do kind of know what it's going to be, but I will announce it soon. So make sure you subscribe. Hit the subscribe thing again because it's so cool. Haha. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And then I've got a couple weeks already planned. So Thursday nights, 7:30 is kind of becoming the time. So make sure you join me. You guys are awesome. Stay safe. Have a great weekend if you guys are having a long weekend in the United States. It's Memorial Day weekend. So, everyone's home anyways. So I guess have fun at home for a longer weekend. And yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got some value out of this. And I'll talk to everyone later. Bye-bye.